October 20th, 1944, Red Beach, Lady Island, Philippines. Corporal Thomas Riley was dying, not about to die. Dying. He lay face down on the sand, blood pouring from the wound in his thigh. A mortar fragment had torn through his femoral artery 3 minutes ago. He had maybe 4 minutes before he lost enough blood to pass out, and 7 minutes before his heart stopped beating. The sand beneath him was turning dark red. He could feel his heartbeat slowing, each pulse weaker than the last. His fingers were going numb. The tropical heat that had been suffocating him all morning now felt distant, like something happening to someone else. Around him, 12 of his squad mates were dead or dying. The entire unit was pinned down by a Japanese bunker on the hill above them, a concrete and steel fortress that American artillery had been pounding for 20 minutes without making a dent. The Type 92 machine gun inside kept screaming. Every time someone moved, bullets ripped through the air. Sand sprayed up like rain. Private Jenkins lay 3 feet away, a hole in his chest, eyes staring at nothing. Sergeant Patterson was crawling toward Riley, shouting something, but the words did not reach him through the ringing in his ears. Riley looked up at the sky. Through the blood in his eyes, he saw 150 artillery shells arcing overhead from the fleet offshore. Beautiful, almost the way they cut through the blue, like falling stars in daylight. Useless, he thought. That bunker cannot be destroyed. We have hit it 47 times. It is still there. It will always be there. And I am going to die looking at it. But he was wrong. The next shell hit the bunker, and everything changed. It was not the boom he had heard hundreds of times before. This was a roar, deep, heavy, as if the earth itself was being torn apart. The shock wave slammed into his chest like a fist, knocking what little breath he had left right out of his lungs. The concrete bunker did not get hit. It got erased. Concrete steel wood blasted 60 feet into the air. A column of black and red fire spiraled upward like a volcanic eruption. Debris rained down across the beach. A chunk of rebar landed 10 feet from Riley's head, still glowing. The machine gun stopped. Silence. For a moment, nothing moved. Then shouting, American voices. Sergeant Patterson reached him, hands pressing down on the wound. Medic, medic. The word echoed across the beach. Riley survived. 3 minutes later, the medics reached him in time. They stopped the bleeding. They carried him to the aid station. They saved his leg. But a question haunted him for the rest of his life. What the hell was in that shell? He asked everyone. Doctors, officers, other soldiers. Nobody knew. Nobody had seen anything like it. One shell doing what 47 could not. The answer lay with a Texas farmer who had never held a gun. A man the whole town laughed at for cooking recipes for his crops, and he would never know how many lives he saved. 3 years earlier. Tyler County, Texas. July 1941. The Texas sun burned everything it touched. 104 degrees in the shade if you could find any shade. No rain for 6 weeks. The soil cracked like snakeskin, shedding its skin-deep fissures, running through the fields like wounds that would not heal. Walter Brennan knelt in his dying cornfield, both knees pressed into the red dirt. 42 years old. Hands calloused like tree bark from 30 years of working this land. Gray eyes that belonged to a man who had lost too much and expected to lose more. The corn around him was brown and brittle. Stalks that should have been 6 feet tall barely reached his waist. Leaves that should have been green and full hung limp and yellow, crackling when the hot wind blew. Another failed crop. Another season of watching things die. Those gray eyes had seen things no father should see. 2 years before, Walt had a son. Daniel Brennan, 19 years old, died of pneumonia in the winter of 1939, Walt's only child. The boy had caught a cold in November, and by December it had settled in his lungs. They did not have money for the hospital in Houston. The doctor in town did what he could, but it was not enough. Nothing was enough. Walt sat by the bed for 6 days watching his son struggle to breathe, watching his lips turn blue, watching the light go out of his eyes. He buried Daniel on a hill behind the farmhouse under an oak tree the boy used to climb when he was small. His wife Margaret could not bear the loss. She stopped speaking, stopped eating, stopped looking at Walt. She blamed him, though she never said it out loud. She did not have to. He could see it in her eyes every time she looked at him. She left the following spring, taking nothing but a suitcase and whatever cash was in the jar on the kitchen counter. She did not say goodbye. She did not leave a note. Walt came home from the fields one evening, and she was simply gone. Now he was alone with 120 acres of dying land and an empty house that creaked in the wind. Daniel had wanted to become an engineer. The boy loved science books, loved experiments. He used to stay up late reading about chemistry and agriculture, filling notebooks with ideas and calculations. He would sit with Walt for hours on the porch, talking about ways to improve the soil, ways to make things grow where nothing else would. But I think the problem is nitrogen. Daniel said one evening about a month before he got sick, "It washes out too fast. The rain comes, and it is gone before the plants can use it. We need something to hold it in the soil." Walt had nodded, not fully understanding, but proud of his son. Proud that the boy was smarter than he would ever be. Now Daniel lay in the ground, and Walt was trying to finish what his son never got to complete. He held a glass jar filled with gray-black powder, a mixture of ammonium nitrate, ammonium sulfate, and ground charcoal, the formula Daniel had sketched in his notebook. The idea the boy never got to test. Walt did not trust himself. He doubted everything he did because he had failed to save his son. If he had sold the land a year earlier, they would have had money for the hospital. If he had taken Daniel to Houston sooner, if he had done anything different. The guilt sat in his chest like a stone, and it never moved. He had no degree. No formal education past 8th grade. No one believed in him, and he feared that everything he was doing was just a waste of time. He brought the jar to Henderson's farm supply store on a Tuesday morning. The store smelled like seed and motor oil and chewing tobacco. 3 men stood around the counter near the register. Bill Tucker, the owner, 55 years old, always had an opinion about everything and shared it whether you asked or not. Roy Dawson, the richest farmer in the county with 800 acres of prime land, looked down on anyone with less, which was everyone. Samuel Hutchins, the local mechanic, Walt's childhood friend, the only one in town who did not treat him like a failure. Walt placed the jar on the counter and explained the formula. Ammonium nitrate for nitrogen. Ammonium sulfate to slow the release, ground charcoal to hold it all together and keep the soil moist. Roy Dawson burst out laughing before Walt even finished. "Are you crazy, Walt? You are mixing explosives in your barn. You want to kill yourself like you killed your son." The words hit Walt like a physical blow. He felt his face go hot. His hands started to shake. "Roy," Sam shouted, stepping forward. "You cannot say that." "Say what?" The truth Dawson shrugged, not even bothering to look ashamed. If he had sold the land last year instead of holding on to it, he would have had money to treat the boy. Everyone knows it. He is too proud and too stupid to admit he let his own son die. The store went quiet. Tucker looked down at the counter. Sam looked like he wanted to hit Dawson. Walt said nothing. He could not speak. He put the jar back in his pocket and walked out of the store. He heard Dawson laughing as the door closed behind him. That night, he sat in front of Daniel's grave in the darkness. The oak tree rustled overhead. Stars filled the sky, more than you could count. "You were right about the nitrogen," he whispered. "I will prove it to them." He did not know if he was talking to Daniel or to himself. Maybe both. 8 weeks later, Walt harvested his test plot. He had chosen 3 acres behind the farm where neighbors could not see. He divided the land into sections, some with regular fertilizer, some with his mixture, some with nothing at all. He recorded everything in the notebook Daniel left behind: temperature, moisture, leaf color, plant height. He measured the same plots at the same time every day, writing down numbers until his hand cramped. The corn in the test sections grew taller, greener, stronger. By week 6, the difference was obvious even from a distance. When harvest came, Walt pulled the ears himself, counted them, weighed them. The result, 40 bushels per acre. He stared at the number, read it again, and again. 40 bushels per acre, more than 40% higher than his old yield. The best result he had ever had. The best result anyone in the county had had in a decade. For the first time in 2 years, Walt cried. Not from joy, because Daniel was not alive to see it. The formula the whole town laughed at had just produced the highest yield in Tyler County in 10 years. But Walt did not dare tell anyone. He was afraid it was a fluke, afraid they would find some reason to mock him again, afraid of hoping. December 7th, 1941. The radio in Walt's kitchen crackled with the news. The announcer's voice was shaking. Pearl Harbor. Walt sat at the table, coffee cup in hand, listening to reports of American boys dying on battleships in Hawaii, trapped below decks, burning, drowning. Many of them were Daniel's age, some probably younger. In the weeks that followed, everything changed. The country was at war. Factories shifted to military production. Young men lined up to enlist. Crop prices soared because the military needed food, needed lots of it. But ammonium nitrate, the main ingredient in Walt's formula, started being controlled by the government. It could be used to make explosives. Suddenly, it was not just fertilizer anymore. It was a war material. While the whole country rushed to buy fertilizer before it ran out, Walt realized he was sitting on a gold mine, or a ticking bomb. He had bags of the stuff in his barn, enough to fertilize his fields for 2 seasons, or enough to blow himself and the whole farm to pieces if something went wrong. That evening, Sam Hutchins came to visit. He brought a bottle of cheap whiskey and sat down on the porch steps beside Walt. They watched the sun go down the sky, turning red and orange over the fields. "I heard about your yield," Sam said. 40 bushels. Is that real? Why did you not tell anyone?" Walt was silent for a moment, took a sip of the whiskey. It burned going down. "Because I did not want them to laugh. And because I was not sure it was not just luck." Sam looked at him. "Walt, you know ammonium nitrate can explode, right? I know. But in dry form with charcoal, it is stable. I read about it. Daniel read about it." Sam nodded slowly. "If this formula works, you could save your farm. Maybe save other farms, too." Walt stared out at the dark field. The place where his son was buried was just visible on the hill, the oak tree a black shape against the stars. Or I could blow myself up and become Roy Dawson's last joke. March 1942. The envelope arrived on a Monday. Plain brown paper. No return address. Just one line printed above his name. Official business. War Production Board. Walt's hands trembled as he opened it. Your compound has properties of interest to National Defense Research. He read it 3 times, then a 4th. National Defense Research, he whispered to the empty kitchen. What do they want with my fertilizer? The letter requested his presence in Washington, D.C. on March 20th. Travel expenses would be reimbursed. It was signed by someone named Hartley. No title, no explanation. Walt Brennan, the man who lost his son, lost his wife, was mocked by the entire town, was about to be summoned to the nation's capital. And he did not know if this was an opportunity or a trap. He showed the letter to Sam that evening. What do you think it means? Sam asked. I do not know. Maybe they want to buy the formula. Maybe they want to arrest me for hoarding ammonium nitrate. Or maybe they found out what you have. And they need it. For what? Sam shrugged. It is war, Walt. They need everything. The night before he left for Washington, Walt walked up the hill behind the farmhouse. The moon was bright enough to see by. He stood in front of Daniel's grave hands in his pockets, breath fogging in the cold air. Son, he said, his voice hoarse, I do not know what I am doing. This formula could help people, or it could kill people. I do not know anymore. The wind picked up, rustling the bare branches of the oak tree. Somewhere in the distance a coyote howled. But if I do not go, I will always wonder. And I already have too many regrets. He reached out and touched the cold headstone, ran his fingers over the letters of his son's name. I will do the right thing, even though I do not know what that is yet. 2 weeks later, he boarded a train in Lufkin, Texas, an old suitcase in one hand, Daniel's notebook in his coat pocket pressed against his heart. He had never left the state before. Washington, D.C. would change everything. March 1942, Washington, D.C. The train pulled into Union Station at 7:30 in the morning. Walt stepped onto the platform and stopped, overwhelmed. He had never seen so many people in one place. Thousands of them rushing in every direction, bumping shoulders, checking watches, shouting for porters. Men in suits, women in smart dresses. Soldiers in uniform everywhere, duffel bags over their shoulders, heading to war or coming back from it. The ceiling arched overhead like a cathedral. Voices echoed off marble walls. The air smelled like cigarette smoke and perfume and engine grease. Walt stood there in his old wool coat, the one that had not been new since before the Depression. His hat was weathered and creased. His shoes were scuffed brown leather that he had polished as best he could, but they still looked like what they were. Farmer's shoes. Working shoes. He felt like a fish thrown onto dry land. A man in a gray suit approached him. Tall. Thin. Face like a closed door. Mr. Brennan, yes. Follow me. No handshake. No introduction. The man turned and walked toward the exit without looking back. Walt followed, suitcase in hand, Daniel's notebook in his coat pocket. They drove through the city in a black car with government plates. Cherry blossoms lined the streets, pink and white against the spring sky. Beautiful, but no one seemed to notice. Everyone was moving too fast. The car stopped in front of a building on Pennsylvania Avenue. No sign out front. No flag. Just a plain stone facade with tall windows. Inside, the man in gray led Walt down a long hallway. Their footsteps echoed on the tile floor. They passed doors with numbers but no names. Finally, they stopped at a room at the end. Wait here. The man opened the door and gestured Walt inside. The room was small. No windows. A single table in the center with 4 chairs. A pitcher of water sat untouched. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in a pale, sickly glow. 3 people were already seated. The first was the man in gray who took his place at the head of the table. His name was Hartley. Walt would learn that later. He never learned what Hartley's title was or what agency he worked for. The man spoke like a machine, every word precise, every sentence clipped. The second was a scientist, Dr. Eugene Walsh, white lab coat, round glasses, ink stains on his fingers. He looked at Walt with curiosity, like a man examining an interesting specimen. The third was a soldier, Colonel Marcus Webb, army uniform pressed sharp enough to cut paper. Medals lined his chest. He had the eyes of a man who had seen combat and was not impressed by much anymore. Walt sat down across from them. He placed Daniel's notebook on the table. His heart was beating so hard he was sure they could hear it. Hartley spoke first. "Mr. Brennan, describe the exact composition of your compound." Walt swallowed. "Ammonium nitrate, ammonium sulfate, ground charcoal, ratio of 3:1 to 1. Why charcoal? It holds moisture, keeps the other compounds together, stops the nitrogen from washing out when it rains." Dr. Walsh leaned forward, eyes bright behind his glasses. "Are you aware that ammonium nitrate is an oxidizer, that it can explode under certain conditions?" "I am aware. But in dry form mixed with charcoal, it is stable. Where did you learn that?" "Library books. And my son." Silence. "Your son Walt," looked down at his hands. The calluses. The dirt under his fingernails that never quite came out. "Daniel. He wanted to be an engineer. He came up with the idea before he died." No one spoke. For the first time, Dr. Walsh's expression softened. Just a little. Colonel Webb stood up and leaned forward, palms flat on the table. "Mr. Brennan, are you aware that your formula with minor modifications meets the density and energy thresholds for use in military ordnance?" Walt blinked. "Ordnance explosives. Specifically a booster compound. Something that sits between the detonator and the main charge. Its job is to amplify the blast." The room seemed to tilt. Walt gripped the edge of the table. "You want to use my fertilizer to make bombs. We want to use your compound to help win the war. To kill people." Webb did not blink. "To achieve victory." Walt closed his eyes. He thought about Daniel, about the nights they sat on the porch talking about nitrogen and soil and making things grow. His son had created this formula to help crops, to feed people, not to destroy them. "I made this to grow corn," Walt said. "I did not make it to be a weapon." Hartley cut in his voice, cold as ice. "Mr. Brennan, at this moment, thousands of American boys are dying every day, many of them the same age as your son. If your compound can help end this war sooner, it will save more lives than it takes. That is simple mathematics." Walt opened his eyes. He looked at Hartley, and then at Webb, then at Walsh. "If I agree," he said slowly, "can I know where it will be used? Who it will be used against?" Hartley's response was immediate. "Security." "Then how do I know?" "It saves people, and does not just kill innocent civilians. You do not know. That is not your concern. Your concern is to provide the formula. The rest is our responsibility." Walt felt something shift inside him. A hardness he did not know he had. "No. Excuse me. No. If I give you this formula, I have the right to know where it goes. If you will not tell me, I will go back to Texas and keep growing corn." The room went quiet. Hartley's eyes narrowed. Webb and Walsh exchanged glances. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Webb nodded slowly. "Agreed. You will receive basic updates, but you must maintain absolute secrecy. No one can know. Not your neighbors, not your friends. No one. Walt met his gaze. Understood. Hartley slid a stack of papers across the table. A contract. Walt did not read it all. He did not understand half the legal language anyway. But he signed it. And just like that, his fertilizer formula became government property. Before Walt left, Hartley stopped him at the door. "What you created is not a bomb, Mr. Brennan, but it is part of one. And in this war, that might be exactly what we need." Walt nodded. He walked out of the building into the spring sunshine. Cherry blossoms drifted down around him like pink snow. He had come to Washington as a farmer with a formula. He was leaving as something else. He was not sure what. Summer 1942, Karnak, Texas. Bulldozers flattened 8,500 acres of pine forest. Rail lines sprouted like veins. Warehouses rose from the dirt. Loading docks, production lines, guard towers, the Longhorn Army ammunition plant. Its purpose was to manufacture TNT for the military, millions of pounds of it, enough to supply the entire Pacific theater. But in one corner of the facility, behind fences and unmarked doors, was a smaller operation. No signs, just numbered codes. This was where they produced TXF-41, the booster compound based on Walt Brennan's formula. Walt was not allowed to visit often. They wanted him to stay in Texas out of sight, just a farmer tending his crops. But every few weeks, a black car would come for him at night and drive him to the plant for consultations. It was on one of these visits that he met Captain Robert Morrison. Morrison was 38 years old, MIT educated, head of technical operations for the TXF-41 section. He was tall and thin, with salt and pepper hair, and a face that always looked like he was smelling something unpleasant. The first time they met, Morrison did not shake Walt's hand. "So you are the genius farmer." He looked Walt up and down. "What degrees do you hold, one, sir?" "Interesting. We have 47 engineers here with master's and doctoral degrees. And now we are taking orders from someone who did not finish high school." Walt said nothing. He had heard this before. Morrison stepped closer. "Let me make something clear to you, Mr. Brennan. If your formula causes any kind of accident, explosion, fire, injury, I will personally ensure that you are prosecuted. And I will enjoy doing it." He turned and walked away. Walt stood there in the hallway, heat rising in his chest. He thought about Daniel, about the notebook, about the nights of testing and measuring and hoping. He had spent his whole life being looked down on, by Roy Dawson, by the banks, by anyone with a degree or a title or money. He was used to it, but that did not mean it stopped hurting. February 1944. The quality inspection report landed on Morrison's desk like a bomb. Multiple barrels of TXF-41 had moisture readings of 5.2%. The safety threshold was 3%. The compound had clumped, softened. It was unusable. Production stopped. The plant went into emergency mode. Morrison called a meeting. His voice was full of barely contained satisfaction when Walt arrived. "Here we are, Mr. Brennan. Your perfect formula." He held up a sample of the wet, clumped powder. If these barrels had been shipped, they could have caused misfires, or worse. Walt asked to see the production logs. For 30 minutes, he went through the records, dates, times, storage locations, humidity readings. Then he found it. Every failed batch was stored in the new warehouse wing. The only section without dehumidifiers. He pointed it out. Silence fell over the room. "You cannot blame the flour if the oven is leaking," Walt said. His voice was calm, but his eyes were fixed on Morrison. Morrison's face went red. He said nothing. The problem was fixed within hours. New humidity controls were installed. Production resumed. But Morrison never apologized. and he never stopped looking for a chance to bring Walt down. March 1944. The explosion was not large, but it was loud enough to echo across the entire plant. A deflagration in the shell loading area. Not a full detonation, but a sudden burst of flame and force. 3 workers were injured. One of them was Frank Castellano. Castellano was 29 years old, married. His wife was 7 months pregnant with their first child. The blast burned his hands and face. He was taken to the infirmary, wrapped in bandages, unable to see or hold anything. Walt asked permission to visit him. The infirmary smelled like antiseptic and gauze. Castellano lay on a cot by the window, his head and hands wrapped in white. He turned toward the sound of footsteps. "You are the one who made the formula." Walt nodded, then realized the man could not see him. "Yes, my wife is about to have a baby. I do not know if I will be able to hold my child." Walt could not speak. His throat closed up. He turned and left the room, made it to the bathroom, vomited into the sink. That night, he did not sleep. He sat on the porch of his farmhouse, staring into the darkness. A cigarette burned between his fingers. He did not smoke often, but this was not an ordinary night. Castellano's bandaged face kept appearing in his mind. The way the man's voice had trembled. The question that hung in the air like smoke. Is this my fault? Walt opened Daniel's notebook, looked at the formula, the numbers, the ratios. Everything was correct. He had checked it hundreds of times. But if everything was correct, why did people get hurt? And if those shells were shipped, how many more people would die? He wrote a letter to the director of the Longhorn plant. "If you believe my compound is not safe, stop using it. I did not create this to harm anyone. I created it to grow corn. If anyone else is hurt because of this formula, I cannot live with that. Walter Brennan." 3 days later, the reply came. "The issue was procedural, not chemical. Your compound remains valuable. So do you. Continue." There was a second note enclosed from Dr. Walsh. "Mr. Brennan, I have reviewed all the data. Your formula is not at fault. The accident was caused by static discharge from metal tools. A plant error, not yours. Do not give up." Walt read it twice, then a third time. It was the first time anyone from their world had stood with him. That evening, he heard a familiar sound. The rumble of Sam Hutchins's old pickup truck coming down the dirt road. Sam got out, walked over, sat down on the porch steps beside him. "I heard about the accident at the plant. Are you all right?" "I was not hurt." "That is not what I asked." Walt looked at his friend. "Someone was burned because of my formula." "Sam, he is about to have a child. And you are blaming yourself. I should stop. Go back to farming." Sam was quiet for a while. Then he spoke. "You know Daniel said something to me once, before he passed." Walt turned to look at him. He said, "Uncle Sam, my father does not know how good he is. He just needs to believe in himself." Walt could not speak. His eyes burned. "That boy believed in you, Walt. Are you going to quit on him now, summer 1944? A telegram arrived. TXF-41 designated for Operation King 2. Large quantities required. Increase production immediately. Walt did not know what King 2 was. He only knew they needed more. Much more. Over the following months, the Longhorn plant ran at full capacity. Tens of thousands of shells loaded with TXF-41 were produced, packed, loaded onto trains, shipped to ports, loaded onto ships. Destination, the Pacific. Target, an island Walt had never heard of. Leyte. He stood in his cornfield one evening, watching the sun go down. Red and gold across the sky. Beautiful and terrible at the same time. Somewhere out there, his formula was being packed into shells. Those shells would be fired at people. Some of those people would die, and some American boys might live because of it. He did not know which side of the scale weighed more. He was not sure anyone could, but he had made his choice, and now he had to live with it. "Daniel," he whispered to the empty field, "I hope I did the right thing." The wind carried his words away. No answer came. October 20th, 1944. Dawn. The American fleet appeared on the horizon like a steel wall rising from the sea. Battleships, cruisers, destroyers, troop transports. More ships than anyone on that beach had ever seen in one place. They stretched across the water as far as the eye could see, gray hulls cutting through the morning mist. On the bridge of the USS Tennessee, Colonel Marcus Webb stood with binoculars pressed to his eyes. The same Colonel Webb who had sat across from Walt Brennan in that windowless room in Washington 2.5 years ago. The same man who had demanded the farmer's formula and promised him basic updates that never really came. Now Webb was here on the other side of the world, about to see what that formula could do. He picked up a 150 Felmer shell from the rack beside him, turned it over in his hands, ran his finger across the code stamped on the casing. TXF-41. "All right, farm boy," he muttered under his breath. "Show me what you have got." He gave the order. The first salvo launched at 600 hours. The sound was like the sky being torn in half. Shells arced overhead, trailing smoke, and slammed into the hills above Red Beach. The bombardment had begun. On the beach below, Corporal Thomas Riley had stopped counting. 44, 45, 46, 47. Each shell hit the bunker on the hill. Each one did nothing. The concrete cracked but held. Dust flew but settled. The machine gun inside never stopped firing. He was bleeding out from the thigh wound. His vision was going dark at the edges. He could hear his own heartbeat in his ears, slower with each pulse. Weaker. This is it, he thought. This is where I die. Looking at a bunker that cannot be destroyed. Then came 48. He did not see it hit. He felt it. The shock wave rolled through his body like an electric current. His teeth slammed together. His ears popped. The ground beneath him jumped. For a moment, he thought he had died. Then he opened his eyes. Where the bunker had been, there was only sky. A crater sat in its place. Smoke poured upward in a black column. Debris was still falling, chunks of concrete and twisted steel raining down across the hillside. The air smelled like fire and sulfur and something else he could not name. The machine gun was gone. The men inside were gone. The thing that had been killing his friends for 20 minutes was simply erased. Silence. Then shouting. American voices. Movement. The line pushed forward. Riley survived. The medics reached him in time. They stopped the bleeding and saved his leg. But he never forgot that moment. The moment when one shell did what 47 could not. He would wonder about it for the rest of his life. On the Tennessee, Colonel Webb lowered his binoculars. His executive officer stood beside him, mouth open. What the hell was that? The officer asked. Webb did not answer right away. He was looking at the shell casing in his hand. TXF-41, the farmer's formula. He thought about Walt Brennan, the old coat, the worn hat, the calloused hands, the quiet voice that had stood up to Hartley in that room and demanded to know where his formula would go. Well, Webb said quietly, the farmer delivered. 2 kilometers inland from Red Beach, Lieutenant Kenji Yamamoto felt the ground shake beneath his boots. Yamamoto was 31 years old, a career artillery officer in the Japanese Imperial Army. He had served in China, in Burma. He had seen American firepower before. He knew what their shells could do, but this was different. He had been in the command bunker when the bombardment started. Standard American naval fire, loud, destructive, but predictable. His fortifications were built to withstand it. Concrete and steel and packed earth. The bunkers on the hill had taken dozens of hits and held. Then came a different sound. Not the sharp crack of a normal explosion. A deep, rolling roar. A pressure wave that Yamamoto felt in his chest even from this distance. The ground shook so hard that dust fell from the ceiling of his bunker. He ran outside to look. The bunker on the hill, the strongest position in the sector, was gone. A crater sat where it had been. Smoke poured into the sky. "Impossible," he whispered. In the days that followed, Yamamoto gathered reports from the survivors. They described shells that did not just explode, but pushed. Concussive force that knocked men down from hundreds of meters away. Bunkers that had withstood everything suddenly torn apart like paper. One soldier said it felt like being hit by a wave, an invisible wave that came out of the ground. Yamamoto wrote his report to command. American artillery has improved significantly. Their shells demonstrate greater concussive force and penetration. Recommend reinforcing bunkers with thicker concrete and burying weapons deeper underground. He never learned what caused the change. None of them did. They only knew that something was different. Something had shifted, and they were losing because of it. By the end of the Lady campaign, more than 250,000 shells containing TXF-41 had been fired. 4 million pounds of material connected to Walt Brennan's formula had been used. American casualties at Red Beach were 35% lower than projected. The Japanese defensive line collapsed in 4 days instead of the expected 2 weeks. But no one at Lady knew about Walt Brennan. No one knew about the farmer from Texas who had created the formula to grow corn. No one knew that the man who had changed the battle had never fired a gun in his life. Back in Tyler County, Texas, Walt sat in his kitchen and listened to the radio. The announcer's voice crackled through the static. American forces achieve major victory in the Philippines. General MacArthur declares I have returned. Walt sipped his coffee, looked out the window at his fields. The corn was tall this year, green and strong. He did not know which shells contained his formula. He did not know how many bunkers had been destroyed, how many lives had been saved, how many had been taken. He only knew that somewhere across the ocean the thing he created was being used, and he could not stop thinking about it. One afternoon he drove through town. He passed the Peterson house and saw the flag in the window. A gold star in the center. Gold Star. It meant someone in the family had died in service. Billy Peterson, 20 years old, killed at Guadalcanal the year before. Walt pulled over and sat in his truck for 10 minutes staring at that star. How many families did not have to hang that star because of my formula? And how many Japanese families had to hang one because of it? He did not have an answer. He was not sure anyone did. December 1944. A telegram arrived from Washington. TXF-41 contribution to Booster Class Ordnance acknowledged. Performance exceeds projected efficiency. Continue shipments. No signature, no medal, no thank you. Just numbers, just utility. Walt folded the paper, placed it in Daniel's notebook, and never mentioned it to anyone. A month later, another envelope arrived. This one had no return address. Inside was a photograph. It showed a man holding a baby. The The man's hands were scarred, the skin tight and shiny from old burns. But he was holding the child, both arms wrapped around it. The man was smiling. On the back, in careful handwriting, his name is Daniel. My wife thought it was a good name. Thank you. F.C. Walt stared at the photograph for a long time. Frank Castellano had healed. He was holding his son, and he had named the boy Daniel. Walt put the photograph in the drawer next to Daniel's notebook and never showed it to anyone. But some nights when the house was too quiet, he would take it out and look at it. A boy named Daniel, held by hands that had healed. Maybe that was enough. Spring 1945. The war in Europe ended first. Germany surrendered in May. The radio played celebrations from New York, from London, from Paris. Then in August, Japan surrendered. The war was over. Walt listened to the news alone in his kitchen. He did not go into town for the celebrations, did not join the crowds cheering in the streets. That evening, Sam came by with a bottle of whiskey. They sat on the porch as the sun went down. You did it, Walt. You should be proud. Proud of what, Sam? Of helping to kill people, of helping to end the war, of saving lives. Walt shook his head. I do not know how many I saved. I only know I created something that destroys. That is the cost of war, Walt. No one gets through it without scars. Sam poured 2 glasses. They drank in silence. The sky turned red, then purple, then black. Stars came out one by one. Somewhere out there, Walt thought, there are men who came home because of my formula. And there are men who did not come home because of it. He would carry that weight for the rest of his life. A few weeks later, Claire came to visit. Claire Mitchell was Walt's niece, 28 years old, a school teacher from Dallas. She had her mother's eyes and her father's stubborn streak. She arrived on a Saturday afternoon with a suitcase and a newspaper. They sat on the porch watching the sun go down over the fields. Claire held up the paper. The front page showed the famous photograph from Iwo Jima. Soldiers raising the flag on Mount Suribachi. Triumph and exhaustion and sacrifice all in one image. Uncle Walt, she said softly, do you ever wish you had done more? Walt did not answer right away. He looked out at the cornfield, at the hill where Daniel was buried, at the oak tree that had been there since before he was born. Sometimes, he said finally, the most important work does not make a sound. Claire did not understand. Not then. The years passed. Walt kept farming. Through the drought of 1949, through the mechanization wave of the 50s, through the changes that transformed Texas from frontier to suburb, he never remarried. He said the land and the memory of Daniel were all he needed. Sometimes he thought about Margaret, wondered where she had gone, whether she had found peace, whether she ever thought about him or Daniel. He hoped she had. He did not blame her for leaving. Grief did strange things to people. He knew that better than most. He kept Daniel's notebook in the drawer beside his bed. Sometimes on quiet nights he would take it out and look at the formula, the numbers, the ratios, the handwriting of a boy who had wanted to be an engineer. Next to the notebook was the photograph of Frank Castellano holding his son. 2 Daniels, one who never got to live, one who got the chance because his father's hands had healed. Walt thought about the shells, about Lady, Okinawa, the places he had never seen. He did not feel pride. He did not feel regret. He just carried the knowledge with him like an invisible scar. Walter Brennan died in his sleep on a cool October night. He was 63 years old. The obituary in the Tyler County Gazette was brief. Farmer, fertilizer expert, man of quiet faith. It did not mention the shells, did not mention the war. did not mention TXF-41, but in a filing cabinet in Washington, D.C., in a folder once marked Confidential Ordnance Materials, Booster Class C, the name Brennan was still there. A farmer, a nobody, a hero without a uniform. They buried him on the hill behind the farmhouse next to Daniel under the oak tree. Sam Hutchins spoke at the service. He told the small gathering about Walt's stubbornness, his kindness, his refusal to give up even when the whole world laughed at him. He did not mention the formula. He had promised to keep the secret, and he did. But after everyone left, Sam stood alone by the grave. "You saved more lives than you will ever know," he said quietly. "And you never asked for a damn thing in return." The wind rustled the leaves of the oak tree. No answer came, but maybe that was answer enough. The files were declassified on a Tuesday in March, 40 years after the war ended. A military historian named Dr. Robert Chen was researching booster compounds used in Pacific Theater Ordnance when he found the name Brennan in the records. He traced the connection through production logs, shipping manifests, and classified memos. He tracked down Claire Mitchell, now in her 60s, living in a small house in Austin. He sat in her living room and told her what her uncle had done. Claire listened without speaking. She held a cup of tea that had gone cold in her hands. When the historian finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "He told me once that sometimes the most important work does not make a sound. I never understood what he meant." She looked out the window at the street. Children were playing on the sidewalk. Cars passed by. The world moved. On the way it always did. "Now I understand," she said. The historian wrote a paper about TXF-41 and the farmer who created it. It was published in a military journal that most people never read, but Claire made a copy. She framed it and hung it on her wall next to a photograph of Walt standing in his cornfield gray eyes, squinting against the sun. She never forgot those words on the porch. Sometimes the most important work does not make a sound. Now she knew what they meant. Now the world did too. In the end, Walt Brennan asked for nothing. He did not want his name on a battleship, did not want a statue or a chapter in a history book, did not want recognition or reward. He just wanted to finish what his son had started. And he did. The formula Daniel Brennan dreamed up to help crops grow became the force that cracked bunkers across the Pacific. Not because Walt wanted it that way, but because he believed in the value of effort, of trying, of not giving up when the world said he was wasting his time. History is not only shaped by generals and presidents, it is shaped by the people who work unseen, who persist without applause, who carry the weight of consequence without ever knowing how far their actions reach. Daniel Brennan wanted to be an engineer. He did not live long enough, but his idea through his father's hands changed the way a war was fought, and that is a legacy no one ever told, until now.